First of all, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Say that one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
I was trying to avoid the second one.
Everyone, list, and we are now listed. Over to you, and we'll kick off.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Mayor, Commissioners, welcome to the 2025 budget work session. While 2024 wasn't fraught with as many significant challenges as recent years, it has still been impacted by post-COVID unpredictability, which the organization met with creativity, collaboration, and a dedication to public service. In addition to the program and service delivery, considerable time and effort also went into the continued implementation of the Dayton Recovery Plan, which was passed by City Commission December of 2021. We are continuing with the modified budget process by presenting the budget mid-October, allowing for additional time to review. We will be presenting the budget in the CSA community priority format implemented in 2023, including the organization's efforts on continuing the momentum on equity and inclusion initiatives. Also similar to 2024, we will not report out on the corporate services and governance CSA. This information will be covered at a high level during the overview presentation. And a few key accomplishments in the area of technology and finance will be highlighted at the end. Detailed information will be included in your budget binders, just like it is for all of the CSA. So you'll still have that information. So with that, I will turn it over to our Management Budget Director, Abby Jones, and the Management Budget team to begin our presentations.
Thank you, City Manager. All right, so as the City Manager mentioned, we will start with the overview presentation. The overview. The presentation today will include, like I said, overview presentation, which will provide a brief budget overview for all of the CSS, and then we will dive deeper into each of the community service areas, which includes justice, building and environmental safety, economic and community development, and infrastructure. So the budget overview will cover today background and overview of the policy budget process. We will talk through the continuation of the equity and inclusion lens, and then we will talk through the expenditure budget, and lastly, the general fund and enterprise budgets at high level. The background, as you know, in November of 2014, a charter amendment was approved by voters that changed the budget process. In 2015, the City Commission adopted an ordinance that laid out this new budget process. The components of this new budget process includes the 5 community service areas, which we refer to as CSAs, and the focus was based on the CSA's policy objective and community priorities with an emphasis on community outcomes. Since 2016, we've been using the budget process, but with any process, it's iterative and it changes over time. So we have seen minor modifications to this process over time. This image, as you've seen before, illustrates the policy budget framework, starting with many different inputs, such as the community, commission, and the city manager's office, along with the organization. From these various inputs, community priorities are developed. Program objectives combined with program activities are identified and carried out by departments and divisions in order to meet the community priority. The organization then carries out the performance management system through the evaluation of program results with an overarching goal to drive community outcomes with the resources provided each year. The cycle is meant to be ever evolving and in constant progression between resource allocation, community participation and input, implementation of program strategies, and evaluation of these programs. So these are the 5 community service areas. They include the economic and community development, infrastructure, corporate services and governance, building and environmental safety, and justice. The CSAs are linked together to form the framework for the city's policy budget. We will start with the equity and inclusion. In 2025, city manager recommended budget has been developed with a lens towards equity and inclusion. For a little bit of background, starting in 2022, all departments were asked to describe how their budget, work plan, and policies address the policy priority of equity and inclusion. In 2023, a particular focus was made towards identifying what data could be used or applied to evaluate the programs and initiatives to address and impact equity and inclusion. To continue the momentum and the work towards this policy priority for 2025, departments were once again asked how their budget addressed equity and inclusion and provide outcomes of these efforts. Equity and inclusion can be applied both externally and internally. Departments with public interactions can look at data to improve equity and inclusion in programs and service delivery. And internally, departments can address equity and inclusion by reviewing hiring practices and address to opportunities for professional growth, development, and advancement. The budget presentation before you today will have a greater focus on applying an equity and inclusion lens externally. After departments provide an update on their 2025 budget allocation and program performance, they'll also highlight the 2024 outcomes and their plan for 2025 in addressing the equity and inclusion within their respective departments. So the presentation focus today is presented by the CSA, community priorities and programs that address each priority. Given the specific investment in community throughout the organization in the Dayton Recovery Plan, the presentation also includes the Dayton Recovery Plan update. Each of the presentations by CSA and priorities will cover the following parts of the city's budget. Operating budget, which includes general fund, select special project funds, other special revenue funds, roadway maintenance fund, enterprise funds, major grants, and internal service funds. And then the capital budget will include enterprise capital, general capital, HUD, and select other special revenue funds. What's not being presented today are the most special project funds, bond retirement fund, non-major grants, and most other special revenue funds. So this slide shows the budget by fund. As you can see, general fund is up by 6.6% or $14.2 million. This growth represents the annual wage increases along with the additional of personnel previously funded from the state ARPA grant for both police and fire. And that's why you're seeing that big growth in the general fund, because those costs for the 54 personnel that were previously funded from the ARPA grant came back to the general fund in 2025. Collectively, the enterprise funds are up 1.9% or $3.5 million when compared to 2024. The marginal growth is due to the reduction aviation budget, which is offsetting the growth largely in water and sewer. Internal service funds has a decrease of 2.8%, and this is largely in public works fleet operation due to lower anticipated costs for fuel in 2025. The decrease of 16.9% in HUD is associated with the funding cuts by the federal government, as you know. For this reason, the expense for 2 positions in the city's planning department has moved to the general fund, which is the bulk of the decrease, totaling about $216,000. For enforcement fund has a decrease of 12.1%. This is due to the difference between 2024 and 2025 transfer amounts. This photo enforcement budget is a combination of 2 funds. The old photo enforcement fund, which was set up in 2016 to collect the revenue from the traffic enforcement camera program. And then the new photo enforcement fund which was created to receive the refunds from the state of Ohio. After the state reduced the local government fund by the revenue that's collected from the traffic enforcement camera program, the state is refunding us for the portion that's collected in school zone. Hence the reason for two funds. And so last year, you may recall, we had a transfer of $5 million from the full enforcement fund into the general fund to cover some of that lost revenue. This year, we're doing a transfer of $3.8 million, so there is a slight reduction in that transfer amount. This year would be the last year to do that transfer. So as mentioned last year, this is a one-time solution that we're using to balance the budget. Starting in 2025, we will discontinue the use of that old photo enforcement fund now that we have the new photo enforcement fund. The revenue that was collected in that old photo enforcement fund will directly go into the general fund. Court service fees budget has increased by 71.4% or $660,500, and this is largely due to the grant funding that's providing an installation of recording equipment and software for 7 courtrooms. Additionally, the court's case management system will be fully implemented in 2025, and so the maintenance cost for that case management system is coming on board in 2025. So that's why we're seeing that increase in the court service fee budget.
I apologize, Ms. Patel-Jones. Quick question. Could you please go back to the photo enforcement? You said one of the funds will be phased out, correct? The new one? The old one will be phased out and then it will go into the new fund. Is that correct? Okay.
The old one will be phased out. It won't go into the new fund. That revenue will go directly into the general fund.
Okay. Thank you.
Because of the various increases and decreases, which we will discuss in detail as we progress throughout the budget presentations, the total operating funds are up by 2.3%. Total capital budget has a decrease of 5.7%, and that's largely due to the governmental capital. Because 2025 is a non-debt year, that's why we're seeing that big decrease in governmental capital. And enterprise capital is up largely due to increased capital improvement plans in aviation that is funded from aviation grants. So here is the proposed operating budget. Total operating budget is $496.8 million. And you can see the breakout of major funds. General fund is 46% of that budget. Water fund is 17%. Sewer is 11%. Aviation is 7%, and internal service is 12%. The small slivers that you see on this pie chart, it's kind of hard to put all of the budgets on this pie chart, and so those small slivers is what is listed on the side in that table. And as you can see, most of those funds are around 2% or less of the total operating budget. This is the proposed operating budget and capital budget. This chart shows the budget by CSA. The largest increase is in the Justice CSA, while the smallest increase or decrease is in corporate services and governance. Due to the renewal of the Your Dollars, Your Neighborhood with an increased amount for resurfacing and added housing budget, the budget has increased by $3.2 million. So this is the proposed operating budget and capital budget again, but this is broken out by CSAs. And as you can see, the largest CSA here is building and environmental safety, taking up 31% of the total budget, followed by justice, which is 19%, internal service funds are 12%, corporate services and governance is 9%, infrastructure is what's following the building and environmental safety, so which is 24%, and economic and community development is 5%. And in the top right-hand corner, you see the operating versus capital budget. Operating budget is 86% of the total budget versus capital is 14% of the total budget. This table shows the budget by community priorities. As you recall, the organization went through a change in restructuring the performance management program a couple of years ago. Through that restructuring, we were able to budget by CSA by community priorities. And so this chart was added last year to show the budget by not only the CSAs, but also by community priorities. So you can see the breakdown of all of those community priorities in this chart. Now we will go through each of the CSAs, starting with justice. In justice CSA, the 2024 proposed budget is up by $4.6 million or 5.3%. This is the largest dollar increase for any CSA. Police programs make up $3.2 million of the proposed budget increases as a result of anticipated wage adjustments following the final contractual agreement. The increase is offset by a lower transfer, as I discussed, from the city's law enforcement fund into the general fund to cover the operating deficit generated by the reduction in local government funds. Municipal court experienced an increase of 13.4%, and this is largely due to that courtroom technology upgrade that we are going to implement in 2025, as well as the case management system. Law Department's criminal division budget has a increase of 13.4%, and this is from promotional wage increases. And lastly, the clerk of court and mediation center, their budgets are up just an inflationary amount within the CSA. Next, we have building and environmental safety. The 2025 proposed budget for building and environmental safety is up $4.2 million or 2.9%. Water makes up $2.7 million of this increase, and this is largely due to the planned building security enhancement and maintenance costs and increased chemical expenses in 2025. Fire had $123,200 less for technology in 2025, and so when lower technology allocation and the health insurance holiday is factored out, the growth is 2.3%. 2025 budget includes 2 smaller recruit classes compared to 1 large recruit class that we did in 2024. And also, just as a note, Engine 10, which was funded in 2024's budget initially, which is cross-staffed with 2 medics, is also funded in the 2025's budget. And as you can see, the CSA also includes the Your Dollar, Your Neighborhood, the additional funding for housing, which is $650,000. Next, we have Economic and Community Development CSA. This CSA's budget is down slightly, is 0.9% or $268,000. Aviation assumes 2% decrease, largely due to the computer maintenance expenses transferring to Aviation Operations Division. P&D Director's Office is contributing $273,600 towards the total decrease from filling 1 vacant position at a lower rate, and also abolishing 1 position. And then HRC decreases by 2.4% from a reduction in the contractual labor cost for 2 positions with the addition of 1 full-time BTA outreach position. So there is a little bit of swap here. That's why HRC's budget is reducing slightly. And then community development decreased to align with 2024 revised action plan from the federal government. The next is infrastructure. Infrastructure is up by 3.8%, or a little over $2 million. 4 of the program areas have proposed budget decreases, while 10 have increased within the CSA. Aviation represents the largest decrease in dollars by $1.1 million. This budget has declined due to the lower utilities cost and maintenance costs as a result of facilities upgrade that aviation has implemented in the last few years. And so this is a good news story where we're able to reduce the operating costs because of those improvements. And then civil engineering includes capital transfers, which are $532,200 higher than prior year. And lastly, we have corporate services and governance. Within the CSA, Non-departmental, 2024 budget included funding for police personnel costs pending FOP contract. That's where we budgeted it in 2024. That's why we're seeing that decrease in non-departmental. The reduction of 3.4% in IT is reflecting lower technology allocation and movement of police and recreation specific expenses to the respective departments. Internal service funds are also down due to a decrease in both fleet management and health insurance fund, which is offset by an increase in the workers' compensation fund. Okay, so as you recall, during April's presentation, when we talked through the preliminary forecast, our gap between sources over uses was somewhere between $5 to $7 million with some assumptions for revenue and expenditures. 2025's general fund budget was balanced with mostly one-time major solutions, which is what you see on the screen, totaling $10.9 million. Starting at the top, we have kept the increased vacancy savings. We had budgeted increased vacancy savings in 2024, and we're keeping the increased vacancy savings in 2025. Even though we are filling positions, we are still at a slower rate filling positions than where we were a few years ago prior to the pandemic, and so we have increased our vacancy savings. And hopefully, as we start to fill those positions in 2026 and 2027, we can phase out the increased vacancy savings and go back down to the normal levels. As I mentioned earlier, the other solution is the $3.8 million transfer from the photo enforcement fund. This is a one-time solution. Investment earnings are also high because of the higher interest rates. And so we are reaping the benefit of not only having the higher interest rates, but also because we have the ARPA funding, which is earning interest. As we spend down that cash, that interest earnings will go down. And so this is also a one-time solution. The interest earnings are projected to be slightly lower in 2025 than in 2024 because of that spend down of ARPA funding. We're also taking one health insurance holiday in 2025, which totals to about $1.5 million for the general fund. In totality, health insurance holiday totals to a slightly over $2.2 million for the organization. Contracts and material also saw a nominal cut across the organization for all general fund departments. We took a small cut, which totaled to about a little over $300,000 in contracts and material. And then lastly, we are using $1.2 million of the cash reserve to balance the budget in 2025. This slide, I won't go too much into detail in this slide. This is the DRP. As we continue to implement the 63 projects that we have funded in the Dayton Recovery Plan, we will, as I mentioned, we will continue to spend down the cash, and we will see those improvements not only in the community, but also in the organization. You may have noticed some of the upgrades that has happened throughout this year in City Hall from this Dayton Recovery Plan. I just want to highlight the $52.4 million. Those are the contracts that are awarded to date in the community, which is what you see in the red highlighted circle. And then $24.2 million contracts are to be awarded in the community in 2025. Okay, so a few key budget takeaways for all funds. General fund revenues in 2025 are expected to increase $8.9 million compared to the revised 2024 forecast. And this is largely the result of stronger than anticipated revenue performance in income tax, property tax, waste collection, and EMS fees. Expense growth has eroded this strong revenue performance, and hence the reason why we're using the budget solutions that I just talked about, along with the $1.2 million of cash reserve to balance the budget in 2025. Fire and police staffing continues to be impacted by the attrition and difficulty filling positions. And so to increase staffing levels, you may recall, we normally do one recruit class in a fiscal year for both police and fire. We have changed the strategy a bit. In 2025, we're both doing multiple recruit classes. And so both fire and police will see multiple recruit classes, and hopefully that will help in filling some of these vacancies. As I mentioned earlier, budget for 2 planners previously funded from HUD is now also budgeted in the general fund due to the budget cuts from the federal government in HUD funding. And so this is just to highlight and keep an eye on if there are further federal actions that could impact future budgets and ability to support services funded from the HUD funding. For aviation, revenues are up 7.9% compared to the second quarter of 2024 as a result of rebounding employment. 2025 revenues are projected to climb 9.5%. We have seen a greater interest in travel post-pandemic. And so as this interest continues, we are projecting to see that increase in aviation revenue in 2025. Water and sewer funds are both projecting an increase in revenue from the city of Dayton customers based on the 3-year rate model that took place in 2023. And so 2025 is the last year for this rate model. Other jurisdictions, their rates are increased. They're substantiated by the cost of service model. And so that happens on an annual basis. Okay, so this is the 2024 revised budget and 2025 proposed general fund sources and uses. Let me. Lost my page, bear with me. There we go. All right, so like I said, we're gonna turn our attention back to the general fund and briefly cover the revenues as well as where we are going to end the year in 2024. The table shows 5-year history of the actual general fund revenues along with 2024's original budget and 2024's revised estimate. And then the last section shows the difference between 2024 revised estimate and 2025's original budget. We're looking at 2024 and comparing the original budget to the estimated year-end budget. Revenues are up 18% or $40 million. However, uses are up the same amount over the original budget, largely due to the treatment of transfers that are related to the ARPA revenue replacement and funding of the Dayton Recovery Plan. Along with funding of the Dayton Recovery Plan, as you recall, during the second revised appropriation, we also funded some capital improvements, and so that's also adding to that increase. You may also notice a sizable increase in the 2021 actuals, 2022 actuals, 2023 actuals, and 2024 final estimate in both total sources and total uses. Again, this is related to the ARPA revenue replacement calculations based on the Treasury formula, and the amounts are reflected here. 2021 was the first year for that ARPA revenue replacement, and so that's when we started to see the increase in sources and uses. As you know, 2024 is the last year because of the Treasury guidance. 2024, at the end of 2024, we must encumber or commit all funds. So this is the last year of that ARPA revenue replacement. In 2025, we will not see this. Moving on to the 2025 revenue numbers, our total estimate is up 4.1% or almost $9 million. And this is based on our revenue assumptions, which were vetted with the Revenue Advisors Group, as we do every year. And we believe we'll continue to see the trends that we're seeing in 2024 into 2025. Uses are also up by the same amount. And because of that, as I mentioned earlier, we are using $1.2 million of cash reserve to balance the budget. The last important takeaway from this slide is the end of the year in 2024. we are anticipating a balanced budget. If you recall, we were planning to use 2.7 million of ARPA revenue replacement when we did the original budget to balance the budget. However, we're planning to end the year with sources and uses equaling. Therefore, we will not have to use that $2.7 million of ARPA revenue replacement. So this is the 2020, as I mentioned, the 2025 revenue forecast was reviewed by the Revenue Advisors Group. Here you can see all revenue categories, all 10 revenue categories. Starting with income tax, which is up 2%. This is a growth over 2024 revised estimate. It equals to about a little over $3 million. Property tax is the second category that has an increase, which is up 9.1%. You may recall, we did talk about property tax millage in our April conversation, where because of the property values increasing in 2023, we are changing the millage from 4.5 mils to the general fund to 5 mils to the general fund in 2025. That's why we're seeing that big increase in property tax in this general fund revenue. Local government fund also increased, and this is largely due to us fully meeting our obligations for the prior revenue collection from the photo enforcement fund. We talked about last year, starting in August of 2023, we started to see the reduction in local government fund. That reduction has come to an end as of August of this year. And so starting in 2025, actually starting later this year, we're seeing that increase, and that increase will continue into 2025. Fines and forfeits are also up nearly 900%. And this is Commissioner Turner's your question earlier. This is where we're seeing that deposit of funds from the photo enforcement fund, which will be deposited into the general fund as opposed to that photo enforcement fund. So that's why we're seeing that large increase in fines and forfeits. And then other revenue also includes that one-time transfer from the photo enforcement fund in the amount of $3.8 million. So compared to the 2024 revised estimate, 2025 revenues are expected to increase in every category, but two, which are the other charges of services and other revenues. Despite the 4.1% growth in revenues from 2024 revised estimate, given the growth in expenses, we are projecting to utilize $1.2 million of cash reserve to balance 2025's budget. The next three slides will cover water, sewer, and storm funds. Two of the three water and sewer funds have programmed a use of fund balance to balance the budget. The above slide is a combination of water and welfare protection fund. As you may recall, the water rates, which were based on the 3-year rate model, are going to see that 9% increase in 2025. The water department has been working through a commendable capital plan, which you will hear more about as they cover their programs in building and environmental safety and infrastructure CSA. The 3-year budget increases are impacted, the year-over-year budget increases for water and welfare protection fund are impacted by some of the cost increases, largely in contracts and material, which include security enhancements, cost for chemicals, professional services, and inflationary increases for supplies and material. This shows the sanitary sewer fund, and so 2025 proposed sewer fund revenues are based on the approved 2023 to 2025 rate adjustments, which is 5.5% in 2025. Sewer funds year-over-year budget increases are also related to the higher contracts and material costs, largely in the sludge disposal cost, equipment and facilities maintenance, gas, and again, inflationary increases for supplies and material. For stormwater fund, it is the same case. The revenues are based on the approved rate adjustments and are in line with actual trends. Here, same story. We are seeing a slight increase in uses, and that's largely in equipment maintenance and necessary supplies and materials have been impacted by the inflationary increases. Quick note, a transfer of position in water financial services is resulting in a negative growth in the financial services line, which is 31.6%. And lastly, we have aviation. Aviation's projected revenues are up 9.5% compared to 2024. Reduction in airport operations and facilities are largely due to the lower contracts and material cost and higher vacancy savings based on trend. And then reduction in transfers out in the non-departmental is due to planned decrease in the total capital project plan. Along with the structural imbalance that we have seen over the past few years, although revenue has performed, we do have some other additional factors that could impact and pose a threat to the future budgets. Work from home reduction are still looming as the organizations are still trying to figure out the process to remit income tax to the cities where their employees are working from home. And so as they figure out that process and make those changes in their payroll, we may see an impact from work from home revenue reduction. The organization is still experiencing higher than anticipated employee turnover, especially in the safety forces. And so if this trend continues, it could have an impact on the future budget. Social and world events are also a threat to the economy, such as the ongoing war in Ukraine and the Middle East. That could potentially change the economics of the country and could have a major impact on the income tax collections in the future. The city's aging infrastructure is also in a constant need for improvement, and so this need will continue in the future. This is a never-ending cycle where we have to continuously invest in our infrastructure. There is also a threat to the business cycle. We could potentially see a recession. Since 2019, we've been talking about how the economy has been in the longest expansion. And because of the pandemic-related stimulus, we did not see that recession. However, as the federal government continues to change the interest rates, we may see that recession in the next few years. That could have a potential impact on our general funds budget. And then lastly, the cybersecurity threats are also very real. As you may have heard in the recent cyber attacks, there is in Ohio, there was City of Columbus in the news, and nationally, the one I recall is a suburb of Atlanta, which had a major cyber attack. And so this is it doesn't only have a cost associated with it, but it also impacts the day-to-day operations. And then lastly, to provide
Ms. Jones, now is the perfect time to make sure everybody's doing the training, right?
Yes.
Everybody working together, make sure that's what holds the tax off. That's what holds it back. They look for the weak link. So thank you all for going through all that training. I know it can be tedious, but this is why we do it.
And to wrap it up with the overview summary, all general fund revenues are expected to grow in 2025. The growth in expenses is outpacing the growth in revenue. The use of one-time sources does provide us a runway for the general fund, especially to address that structural imbalance. And then lastly, the Dayton recovery plan is well underway. We are seeing those improvements throughout the city that are funded from the Dayton recovery plan. Efforts to get funding for external programs was prioritized, and $61.7 million has been encumbered in 2024. 2025 work plan incorporates continuation of actuating the plan as the organization continues to work with the community partners and move forward the projects that are for the city of Dayton. And that is the conclusion of the overview presentations. Any questions?
Additional questions? Mr. Chancellor?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Ms. Patel-Jones, for the overview. I appreciate it this morning. I just want to make sure I'm following. So on the initial chart, I think it was chart 19 or early on, even in the second revised appropriation. Correct me if I'm wrong, the revenue replacement from DRP, was it 10.6? Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and so help me to, or direct me rather, as to where is it noted in the presentation? Because ideally, again, I would think that it would be on chart 19, where you have all of the various budget solutions. I just want to make sure I'm following, because I don't see it, and I see where we have the use of the cash reserve, the 1.2 million, right?
So the chart 19 is for 2025. The ARPA revenue replacement comes to an end in 2024.
Right.
2025, you will not see that revenue replacement.
Okay.
Mr. Fairchild?
And we don't note it in, excuse me, Mayor.
Yeah.
And we don't note it in chart, I guess this is 23 as well for. For the revenue replacement, it says it's, ARPA.
No, 2025 does not include that revenue replacement.
Okay, I'm following. All right,
Yeah, it has been replaced by that
Right.
cash reserve.
okay, very good. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Fairchild?
Yeah. Well, I have two questions. We're using $3.8 million for a one-time solution on the photo enforcement fund. I think you said there's still a balance in that fund, or is that
That's the last of the balance.
so we're putting the whole balance into that solution?
We may have a little residual coming in later part of this year, but we took a conservative approach, so we may see a little bit left over in that fund, but not much.
And then some of the Dayton recovery plan dollars are still outstanding, budgeted to be allocated in the future. So I'm trying to reconcile the accounting that.
All Dayton recovery plan funds are allocated. The
Not
entire,
expended.
not expended, correct.
How's the accounting of that go? I think,
So if you recall, 102 million out of the 138 that we received are funding the DRP.
Right.
And then we are using about 2.6 million to cover the administrative cost to monitor and implement the DRP. And then the remaining funds, which is around $33 million, a little over $33 million, was used to invest in some of the capital investments in the general fund.
I'm looking at page 20. The $21.2 million of contracts to be awarded. And so I'm trying to figure out how we,
So that is the Dayton Recovery Plan. That's the $102 million that's allocated for the DRP. The funds have been allocated. The contracts haven't come before you for approval.
so they're allocated, but they're not expended.
Correct.
And how do we account for when they're expended?
Commissioner, are asking because of the federal guidance that said by 24 they have to be allocated? Or what, I'm trying to understand what,
Because in the budget, it shows in 25, there's zero ARPA dollar spending, right?
in revenue replacement.
So that's the other question I'm asking, like, how does the accounting work? Because if I'm looking at page 23, there's the ARPA FEMA line, and then it comes to zero. So there's still $21 million to be expended, right?
In the DRP. The DRP is not in the general fund. The slide that you see on page 23 is just general fund.
Okay,
The DRP is outside of the general fund.
okay. That's the question. How the accounting.
Mr. Shaw?
I'm clear.
We're good. Thank you.